Mayor Tory and I visited 31 Division on the weekend and heard from residents who were legitimately concerned for their safety. The Toronto Police Service is committed to taking all action to work with our communities and government partners to stop gun violence and disrupt the gang activity that threatens our neighborhoods.
Okay, that's the interim police chief of the city of Toronto, James Raymer. We want to bring in, based on that news over the weekend, based on that shooting, I think there's a lot of diverse opinions about what transpired and how to fix some of these problems. Sam Tekle from Jane Finch Action Against Poverty put out a statement yesterday and is kind enough to join Supriya and myself now. Sam, thanks for making the time. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Gonna go by your statement. You didn't love what you saw. Did you see it Saturday or Sunday rather as a bit of grandstanding, as a bit of a photo op? What were the issues that you and your group have with it?
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit it right on the head, right? So the shooting happened Saturday afternoon, right? And the community's reeling. We're getting supports in place for figuring out what's happening and what kind of measures might need to be taken at the community level just to maintain safety. And within the morning, by 8 or 9 a.m., we're hearing that the interim police chief, the councillor, the NDP representative of the area, and the mayor was going to do a safety walk at 11 a.m. Impromptu. Folks are getting called. City staff are being ordered to come down. And I think that shows, rather than like a deep focus for our lives in our community, the kind of regard we get from politicians, right? So I think if this was going to be a serious engagement, it would have been something beyond an impromptu safety walk with media in tow on Sunday morning at 11 a.m., merely not even 24 hours after a shooting, right? I don't think that's deep political engagement, and communities like Jane and Finch and others like them have been yearning for the kind of focus and spotlight that came on that one Sunday for a few hours. And then even if you relook at the city councillor, the NDP representative, and the mayor, they had these same photos with the exact same messages on their social media. It was merely a grandstanding political stunt, and it was a cheap symbolic gesture, to be honest.
So kind of something orchestrated. Can I make the case that there would be criticism if there was no response whatsoever? You want a legitimate conversation. You want, a legitimate response that isn't seen as a photo op. So there's got to be somewhere to meet in the middle is what you're hoping for longer term, right?
Yeah, I think if there were different constituencies, different communities, they get the attention of politicians and long-term plans, substantive investment, materials, life-saving policies. I think what we got was, oh, wow, we came to the community, we listened, we heard that we need to pop up more COVID tests. The mayor's office knows this, right? This is what was substantively gained out of this. And, of course, communities that are structured like ours need politicians' focus. But I think we needed something beyond a couple hours on a Sunday afternoon.
That's interesting. The perspective is going to be shared by a lot of people listening. Let me ask about the impact that a politician can have anyway, whether it's an opposition MPP or even a mayor of Canada's biggest city. I think a lot of people, when it comes to guns and violence, Sam, look at it and they say policing is a factor, and we can debate the levels of it and the concentration on that particular issue, but as well the court system, that's a factor as well. Do both those things need to be re-examined, discussed? Like, we've got to make the uncomfortable conversations more comfortable, don't we?
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. But I also think that if we're going to have the uncomfortable conversation, then we kind of have to be honest about why that safety walk and that focus from the city, and even actually nationally, the story was picked up nationally. Why did that happen? And that was only because an innocent victim, as the media has been framing it, across the street at Club Boy. This is all tragic, right? And we who work in the community, we can't look at incidents like this as between an innocent and a guilty victim. They're all in our community, right? Whether they're pulling the trigger or they're getting hit, we work with them. So our focus, I think, as a city, we have to understand that they're okay, that our politicians, our representatives, and the broader public is okay when there aren't any innocent victims, right? But when there is, all of this focus comes. We have shootings every day in this city, in many communities. But that one resulted in a community walk. If we're being really uncomfortable because someone who was not in the game or in that, who has chosen that life, that poor decision, was impacted. And we saw that historically in the city, right? With Jane Kriba and onward. So if we're going to have that uncomfortable conversation, let's have that. Okay. Secondly, materially, investment in CCTV cameras, TAVIS, hyper-policing has not helped. Tougher sentences, that has not resulted in a material change. So then we have to look at the other side of the equation. then we kind of have to think about what are some of the preventative measures we can put in place in these communities so that any young person who picks up a gun, that doesn't happen. And then we have to look at the idea that if any young person picks up a gun and shoots on a Saturday afternoon, I think we have to look at that as a failure on all of us, like a collective failure, right? And I think that's part of because they've given up on the societal project if you're going to go shoot somewhere in the afternoon. And I think once we in this city, this world-class city, hopefully self-reported, that we all start to see that as all of our failures, then we can start to have these kind of, substantive conversations and engagement that we talked about. Barring that, we're just going to be picking up the pieces after.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Yeah, and I think that's tough.
And I mean, Sam, with respect to a lot of what you're saying, I mean, we've spoken to experts, both Greg and I in the past, and a lot of what they say is more or less the same with respect to investments in terms of social support services, community services, and be giving the money to the right groups and to the right organizations that are doing the work on the ground. I mean, with respect to what John Tory has done as his tenure, in his mayoralty, I mean, what would you like to see him do going forward, other than showing up for a photo op?
Yeah, I mean, I think first I think Tory is really good at playing defense. And my dad, who was a freedom fighter in another country, said that if you play defense, you get shot by both sides. So I think you need to decide: are we going to continue to invest in policing the same way that we always have in order to appease that crowd, or are you going to turn? And then the political will that we're demanding of our representatives is also you need to get your council and your Queen's Park and your contemporaries to move, right? We know that that's politically unpopular, but the idea that is what we need. And I mean, in general too, we have to, convince a broader public that we need to invest in these communities and that we all need to care about them. I don't know how possible that is, but barring that, we're going to keep seeing these same incidents. We're going to keep seeing the police budget be the number one line item in the city's budget, north of $1 billion. All of that's going to continue to happen unless the politicians move, right? And I think we have to understand that those community activists and people who are in these places on the front lines literally risk their lives. And we're asking politicians to change their vote, to muster up the political will to save our lives, right? And not just in the wake of spectacular violence, which this is, and it's still a tragedy. We understand that. But also just like every day showing up, how do we make these people's lives better so that choice of picking up a gun does not look so appealing? And I think barring that, I don't have any other identity. I'm a professor. I've studied this stuff for years. I don't know if there's any other way to save these lives unless we make different decisions politically. And they may be unpopular, but I think that's the job.
Sam, we're up against the clock a little bit, but I wanted to ask you specifically about community policing, because that's something that, the mayor did say that in speaking to residents, the residents are telling him they want more community policing. But to be honest, I'm not even really sure what that term means anymore, because it's been used by by different politicians in different ways.
Yeah, I mean, I think as someone who works in community, and I actually teach community engagement at U of T, I am appalled that the policing has taken community and taken that word. But community policing in part is the idea that we keep officers in a certain community for extended periods of time. So many of the police officers that work in either Jane and Finch or we could say Melbourne and different region park, different kinds of communities, often get shuffled in and out. This happens with principals, with teachers, many kinds of community leaders. And I think part of the idea of community policing is let's station officers there for, let's say, 4 to 5 years so that they can start to really develop these kinds of relationships with community members, with different constituencies, different community groups. And I think the idea is that this kind of relationship building will produce the kind of intended effect of, better cooperation. And much of it, though, the critique is often framed is that, the community members need to respect police, need to know how to act around police. And I think that's just a dead end. We've pumped so much resources into policing, and literally we've seen the kind of incidents we're seeing that we don't want continue to rise. So I don't think that's the way to go, but I think that's the way politicians have taken up the response to defunding the police, pulling back on police, redirecting investments to say we're going to hire more Black and racialized and Indigenous officers and then put them in communities longer, which is, to be honest, it's just TAVIS with another name, which is hyper-policing, intensified policing, really like police bullying, racial profiling. That's how it's experienced on the ground. And these kinds of relationships that they're saying is being developed, I've seen at least in Jane and Finch firsthand, and we know from our our colleagues and comrades in different communities. That's not happening because policing has a history in these places, long history. So I think community policing is a weak organizational response, but it's also the palatable one for our politicians.
Sam, thanks so much for the time this morning and for your perspective. Really do appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for taking the time to focus on the story. Take care, guys. Have a good day.
Our pleasure. You too. That again, Sam Teckley, a Jane Finch Action Against Poverty.